we as ADB need to incorporate digital into our DNA. We also need to do more to help the region accelerate its digital transformation. Together, we can emerge from the pandemic stronger, more inclusive, and sustainable.
Hello and welcome to DigitalxADB, driving digital development across Asia and the Pacific. We're so glad you could join us today. I'm Uni Jung with Digital Technology for Development Unit at ADB. For this year's DigitalxADB event, we are proud to bring you a series of talks and discussions with leading experts on how we can harness the power of digital for development and accelerate digital transformation. The event will play out over the next 3 weeks and cover 4 themes: digital infrastructure, digital government, digital work, and digital economy. And today, we'll launch into the first track of the event, digital infrastructure. So with that, gives me a great pleasure to invite Dr. Bambang Susantono, Vice President of Knowledge Management and Sustainable Development of ADB, to deliver the keynote on digital infrastructure as key driver of Asia's recovery and resilience. Vice President, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uni. Very good day to all participants, colleagues, partners, ladies and gentlemen. I hope all of you are stay well and also healthy. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to DigitalxADB, our signature event that will delve into how digital technology and digital transformations are reshaping our operations, investment, and the way we work. I'm also happy to kick off the first track of the event, digital infrastructure. The pandemic continues to highlight the critical importance of digital connectivity to our daily lives, and it shows just how crucial digital infrastructure is as a driver of recovery and growth. The pandemic is accelerating digitalizations in education, health, work, commerce, as well as public services. These changes will define the new normal, and as I like to say, the next normal. As the world grows more reliant on digital technology, many governments are looking at digital transformation as the key engine to build forward better. The importance of ensuring widespread and equitable access to digital technology is higher than ever. Yet, more than half of the people in Asia and Pacific remain offline. According to ITU, only 45% of population in Asia and the Pacific in 2019 was using the internet. This digital divide disproportionately affects the poor, women and children, and the elderly in rural and remote areas. For example, in South Asia, women are 36% less likely to use mobile internet, according to GSMA. UNICEF estimates that 768 million children and youth in South Asia and 369 million in East Asia and Pacific lack home internet access, affecting their ability to carry out online learning during the school closure. ITU also found that the rural-urban connectivity gap is significant in developing countries, where urban access to the internet is 2.3 times as high as rural access. Unless we work hard to close this digital divide, our developing members face a greater risk of falling behind. For our regions to emerge from the pandemic with a strong, inclusive recovery, we must seize the renewed interest in providing universal and equitable digital access by increasing our investment in digital infrastructure. The ITU, for example, estimates that at least 1/3 of the global investment gap in digital connectivity must come from public sources. That is a daunting $143 billion. Let me briefly discuss ADB's evolving role in helping countries finance digital infrastructure. We have a long history of investing in digital connectivity. It started with financing Grameenphone in Bangladesh 20 years ago. In the last decade alone, our investment supported connecting the Pacific region with the rest of the world by expanding the network of submarine cables. We also helped expand mobile service coverage in countries such as Myanmar and Papua New Guinea. Recently, we made our first investment in satellite communications through a loan to a private company called KCivic. The project provides more low-cost, high-speed broadband coverage in remote and low-density areas such as the Pacific Islands. Moving forwards, we are looking for ways to accelerate digital connectivity and future-proof the physical assets we invest in. We can do this by promoting co-deployment and sharing fiber in our infrastructure. For example, the Bengaluru Power Distribution System Upgrade Project in Karnataka, India, will co-deploy and lease fiber. As we all know, digital infrastructure is not just communications hardware and networks. It also involves finding the right digital solutions to help the public sector. For example, we have supported social protections projects in the Philippines and Pakistan that harness the power of national digital IDs and digital payments to reach women and marginalized communities. This can be replicated elsewhere. We also started promoting cloud-first policies in the public sector for greater efficiency and agility in delivering government services. We are also building the institutional capabilities of governments to better use digital technologies. We support gathering Earth observations so our developing members can use advanced data analytics and artificial intelligence when planning, monitoring, and forecasting public initiatives. The road ahead in expanding ADB's role in digital infrastructure will not be without challenges. Digital technologies evolve rapidly, so we need to be more adept at scanning the horizon and finding innovative solutions. Traditionally, the private sector has led in digital investment and will continue to do so. Therefore, we must help create a policy environment that encourages private sector investment. This is critical if we are to help our developing members secure their digital future. Finally, we must support our clients address those issues that affect trust in digital technologies, so it is easier for people to adopt and use them. We need an investment and policy approach to digital infrastructure that is inclusive, responsible, and importantly, ethical. In this fast-moving digital world, DigitalxADB is a great opportunity for ADB staff and partners to expand our horizons. The digital infrastructure team offers a host of sessions on topics that cover both the hardware and software of digital infrastructure. These include digital connectivity, national identification, geospatial technologies, cloud computing, cybersecurity, and data protection and privacy. The sessions will discuss emerging digital trends, promote the exchange of policy best practices, help strengthen partnerships, and forge new ones. It is also important opportunity for us to listen to the insight and experience of thought leaders, our partners, and reflect on what we need to do to better support the regional digital transformations. Let me conclude by stressing the importance of seizing on this unprecedented momentum and interest in providing the digital infrastructure at scale for the future of our region. The key to creating a more prosperous, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable digital future is strong collaborations between governments, the private sector, and development partners. I'm really excited to join the dialogues and see how our future collaborations unfold. I hope everyone enjoys the meaningful discussion ahead. Thank you very much and have a good day. Back to you, Yuni.
Thank you, Vice President Bambang Susantono, for your inspirational keynote. We noted that you've highlighted the renewed call for public sector involvement in scaling digital infrastructure and a call for a partnership-centered approach to achieve this. And now, let me turn to the next session of today's event, Digital Connectivity Towards Universal Digital Access. And it is my pleasure to invite Ms. Cleo Kawawaki, Senior Advisor of Central and Department and Chair of Digital Technology for Development Steering Committee at ADB to moderate the session. Cleo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Uni. Okay, this is a great pleasure to moderate. The pandemic has been a wake-up call for all countries on the digital divide. This experience has emphasized that with connectivity, we were able to fully participate and benefit from society and economy. In this session, we will discuss how we could radically boost the investment and close the long-standing digital divide, or at least stop from widening. As VP mentioned in his keynote, more than half of Asia and Pacific are still affected by the by the digital divide, even in the same country. Access to affordable, high quality broadband is differentiated by demographic, gender, location, and income groups. These gaps hold back the prospect of building inclusive and long-term prosperity and resilience. We need to invest in digital infrastructure urgently to fill these gaps. What can ADB do? We need to support our countries to build the policy and the hard infrastructure to attract and nurture investment. This will require all of the tools that we have: knowledge products to analyze and suggest options for policy, planning, and regulations, pilots to test out innovation, policy loans to set the stage for enabling environment, and filling the financing or credit gap with our loans and guarantees for infrastructure projects and for crowding in private sector investment. Aside from the connectivity initiatives BP mentioned, future digital group initiatives includes the raising of awareness in new connectivity technology, starting with working paper on low Earth orbit satellite. And we have the last mile connectivity solutions and fiber co-deployment working papers underway. We're also planning a new technical assistance next year to focus on digital connectivity. We also will continue to explore new investment opportunities with the private and public sector. To guide us on the way forward, we have invited a fantastic panel that represent the key stakeholders in the digital connectivity ecosystem. They'll have 8 to 10 minutes presentation from each panelist and then a 15-minute Q&A session. So please get your answers in the Q&A box. First, to give us the lay of the land with a deep dive in the digital divide in Asia Pacific, we have Ms. Atsuko Okada, Regional Director for UN's International Telecom Union Regional Office to Asia and Pacific. She leads the ITU's support for digital infrastructure covering 38 member countries in Asia and Pacific. Then we have Mr. CK Fong, Group Head of Regulatory Affairs at Axiata Group, which is one of the largest telecom in ASEAN and South Asia with over 155 billion customers. CK has about 17 years of experience in telecommunications with roles in regulatory strategy and policy development with prior experience in network engineering and project management. For the investor's perspective, we have Tom Varghese, the head of connectivity and access policy for Asia Pacific at Facebook. He focuses on regional issues involving spectrum, infrastructure, net neutrality, online communication services, and accessibility. Mr. Varghese is also a visiting policy fellow at the Oxford Internet Institute. For the government, we have Ms. Bolar Erdine Batesengal. I hope I pronounced your name right. Cross my fingers, the chair for the Communication and Information Technology Authority in Mongolia, where she aims to bring better changes to both public and government through the digital governance program, eMongolia. Last but not least, it is a great pleasure to have the eminent Dr. Katsumi Emura to give us the technology side. He is the NEC fellow at the NEC Corporation. He was formerly the Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer of NEC Corporation. So without further ado, may I ask Ms. Okamura to the floor, please. Miss Okuda to the floor, sorry.
Thank you very much. First of all, I wish to thank ADB to invite ITU to this very important event. My name is Atsuko Okuda. I am the Regional Director of ITU Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific based in Thailand. Today, we prepared a PowerPoint presentation which highlights some of the key gaps that we foresee even after COVID and some of the initiatives that we are implementing. Thank you, Rudy. Next slide, please. So I hope that this slide will be found useful. Next slide, please. As you know, ITU is the oldest UN agency, by the way, established in 1865, and we are the specialized agency in ICT. Next slide, please. And we have, if I can continue speaking, we have the three special bureaus in ITU. One is the radio communication. We manage we provide the platform to discuss spectrum management as well as the space orbit, which is a critical function of the radio communication. Thank you. And the second bureau focuses on standardization, which is also critical for the development of the technology. And the third one is on development to bridge the digital divide. We cover 193 countries, and we have about 900 academia and private sector members. Next slide, please. So I would like to start my presentation with the COVID and the external economic situation that influenced the development of digital technology. And this is a graph which was extracted from a World Bank report, which was published recently, which shows the downgrades of the economic growth all across Asia and the Pacific. So this compares the April forecast for 2021 versus October forecast. And we can see the significant economic impact of COVID. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. However, the good news is that in the ICT field, we see some positives as well, as you can imagine, because the businesses and functions have moved and shifted to a digital sphere. We see significant expansion in the digital infrastructure. Next slide, please. Thank you. So ITU in this context conducted econometric studies to identify the impact, the economic impact of COVID and broadband. And as you see on the screen, we found with many factors controlled that the countries with the broadband connectivity fared relatively better to mitigate the economic impact of COVID. And additionally, as you see on the screen, we see a very significant and exponential growth in the international bandwidths all across in Asia and the Pacific. Unfortunately, this slide doesn't show 2020, but we believe that the growth of international bandwidths would continue into 2021 and beyond. So, however, one perhaps issue, as you see, is the sub-regional disparities. The Pacific Islands continue to have less international bandwidth, which carries the data for people to use, and other sub-regions have faster growth. And this is perhaps the results of the cables and satellite capabilities, differential capabilities across Asia and the Pacific. Next slide, please. So we have also looked at different modes of digital technology and connectivity to highlight where are the gaps. This is a slide of GSM Mobile Connectivity Index. As you see, in terms of the mobile, of course, this slide was with a focus on mobile connectivity. But as you see, between 2014 and 2019, we already see a significant progress in terms of the infrastructure, in particular, as well as associated affordability, consumer readiness, and the availability of content and services. And this has continued and accelerated because of the COVID in 2020. Next slide, please. However, one of the challenges that we foresee is the affordability. As you know, the Broadband Commission has set up the benchmark of 2% GNI per capita as the affordability benchmark. And several of Asia Pacific member countries haven't reached that affordability threshold yet. And these countries are found mainly in the Pacific. Due to the geographical predicament as well as the availability of submarine cables, and ADB's investment is really having a positive impact in improving the affordability. Next slide, please. And additionally, next slide, please. Additionally, can you go back? We see a significant disparities between men and women. And this slide shows, if we can highlight on the left-hand side, Asia and the Pacific, there are significant disparities between men and women in terms of the internet usage. And this is translated into the right-hand side, the gap between internet user in terms of men and women. And if we look at Asia and the Pacific, the gap is in fact increasing between 2013 and 2019. And that's the reason why ITU has a dedicated program to address the gender digital divide. Next slide, please. In addition, we looked at the government readiness in terms of digital government and digital services. And we looked at the UN DESA, next slide, please, e-government survey index, and identified the sub-regional disparities. As you see, the higher the score, the better. In this slide, Asia and the Pacific has been the global leaders in terms of the usage and development of e-government. But as you see, Pacific Island countries in general are lagging behind, followed by South Asia, Southeast Asia, and in particular LDCs and CIS could do more to accelerate the usage and development of the digital government. Next slide, please. So in order to further going down into the subnational level, ITU has been assisting the government of Thailand with other UN agencies to map out the unconnected schools. And we will publish this report very shortly, which identified about 300 schools which are still unconnected despite the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I would now want to highlight some of the ITU assistance and support. And one on the screen, as you may have seen, is the interactive transmission map that ITU maintains. This gives an idea on which cities and which locations are connected with fiber optics as well as submarine cables. And this is used as policy-making tools to decide the investment and to develop targeted programs. And we believe that the submarine cables could go hand in hand with satellite and terrestrial cables so as to make sure that the communities are covered in the most optimal way. Next slide, please. And additionally, as mentioned earlier, I would like to very briefly touch upon the ITU initiative on satellite communication. We provided over 90 satellite ground station facilities to 9 countries in the Pacific and provided the connectivity means to remote and unconnected islands. Next slide, please. And it was found quite significant and it was impactful in partnership with Pacific. The ground stations were used for different social and economic purposes, including connecting schools and health units, as well as government offices. At the same time, it was found particularly useful at the time of natural disaster. When the hurricane cyclone Harold hit, that was the only means to connect because of the COVID lockdown. The disaster rescue operations couldn't be implemented. Next slide, please. So we believe that one of the forthcoming challenges to replicate this model is the financing. And accordingly, ITU conducted a study on different financial means for which are available for member countries and partners. And the report is available online. Next slide, please. And I would also like to touch upon I apologize for the slides delay in terms of flipping the slides, but we believe that this is an important intervention for Pacific Island countries because this could really capitalize on different investments in health, in education, and in agriculture, as well as commerce, to be packaged digitally and to provide integrated whole of government services to remote and unconnected islands. Next slide, please. And so based on the success of these Pacific Island countries, we are currently working with UN country teams in the Pacific and developing an integrated smart island initiatives that I would talk about later. And this is one of the examples of smart islands in Vanuatu Molecular, which establishes these telecommunication coverage as well as to provide skill services and provide digital services and the community empowerment. And I hope that this model will be found effective for to address some of the challenges that I highlighted earlier in my slides. So thank you very much. That was the last slide. And I look forward to receiving comments and suggestions and questions. So Cleo, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Okuda. The gender divide, the necessity for digital for everything, it seems, is really apparent in the presentation. Thank you. Now we'd like to go on to Mr. C.K. Fong. He will give us a view of the impact of social policy on the state of mobile broadband connectivity in South Asia. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Cleo. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, perfect.
Yes. Good morning, and thank you very much, Bapak Bambang Susanto and the ADB team for inviting me to be part of your distinguished panel this morning. My name is CK. I work for the Axiata Group. We are a telecommunications company based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. And we have been last few years trying to diversify our core business, which is building broadband connectivity to other forms of businesses, which I will share a bit with you today. Today at today's event, thank you very much. I want to share with you a latest piece of research that we have asked Arthur Little to commission for us. And the title of the report is a bit long, a bit lengthy, I apologize. It's in a sense, the impact of policy making and the state of mobile broadband connectivity in South Asia. Next slide, please. But just let me start with just a brief introduction of who Axiata is, for those who are not aware. We are headquartered in Kuala Lumpur, and we are one of the largest telco groups in Southeast Asia and South Asia. We have market presence in 11 countries, as you see on the brand logos on the left-hand side. We have been in the mobile telecommunications business for the last 30 years, but in the recent maybe 6 to 8 years, we have purposefully tried to diversify ourselves, just like many other telecom groups in the region, to do other things which are adjacent to our core business, and this will be in digital financial services, for example, digital advertising, and the other platforms which surround the ecosystem. Some years ago, we also carved out our tower assets. We have many towers, as you can imagine, across our footprint, and we have put all these assets into a separate company. And this company called EDOTCO, as you see on the bottom left, is actually an independent run company with a separate board, which builds and provides basic infrastructure, both towers and in some markets, fiber connectivity backhaul to many clients in the mobile operator space. So that's pretty, that's how in a nutshell what Axiata is. And today we are about 12,000 employees strong, running across the different parts of Southeast Asia and South Asia. Next, please. So a couple of months ago, we actually asked Arthur Little to think about a piece of work for us, mainly because we wanted to answer the following questions. Number one, I think it's general wisdom that countries with higher levels of broadband adoption tend to fare better. That the impact of broadband connectivity to the economic generally is actually quite proven. There are huge clear productivity gains. The economic competitiveness of a nation increases with higher broadband adoption, and of course, having broadband connectivity everywhere is an entry point into a digital economy. This is e-commerce and stuff like that. So in the last 18 months, of course, we realized this, and most governments realize this, that the lockdowns caused by the pandemic has forced digitization of society and businesses to the fore. And underlying all these is about having a good and affordable broadband connectivity infrastructure, right? Be it from fiber or mobile or satellite. The technology doesn't matter. So in our space, of course, in having experience in building so many mobile networks over the many decades, we generally feel that inputs to this business is quite similar. So in the model, we have towers, we put in towers, we buy equipment, and equipment, of course, is standardized globally across the whole world. Spectrum is also spectrum bands for mobile and for 4G and 5G are also standardized across the world. So these inputs are more or less similar, whether it's in Cambodia or Indonesia or in Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. And the output of this business is also homogeneous. It's selling 1 extra gigabyte or 1 extra better gigabits per second. And the products that go out to our customers, whether it's mass consumers generally, are quite similar. And of course, in society, we see that consumers actually take up broadband, consume broadband in quite similar fashion. They like TikTok, they like to go on social media, they watch YouTube videos, stuff like that. So generally different studies have different points of adoption, but generally they converge into a certain location, right? So this is quite similar, but to us, the puzzlement is that in some countries are doing better in terms of mobile broadband connectivity adoption, whereas some other countries seem to lag. And we specifically wanted to understand whether there are certain key supply drivers, including policy levers, that play an outsized impact to the demand drivers. And this is the result of the study that we commissioned. Next, please. So I noticed, next slide, please, Jen. I do apologize because I don't want to take too much of your time. You can see the details in the slide deck. But generally, we ask the consultants to look at the whole issue into a couple of perspectives. Look into the demand drivers, and this includes, for example, the cost of data, the cost of smartphones. Look at the degree of adoption by SMEs and government public sector. This is a quite important factor in the take-up of broadband. Also look into the supply side drivers, including things that we take for granted, investment policies, regulatory best practices, and of course, country risk, and come up with 44 different matrices to actually examine how the demand drivers actually affect supply drivers. So I think next slide will be quite insightful. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the demand side driver scores. As you can see, we benchmark the different parameters, the matrices on the right hand side. You see the legends, right, from mobile penetration to data usage, cost of mobile data and industrial adoption, and we stack it up according to countries. Also, we asked the consultants to include certain markets in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Vietnam, Philippines, so it may have similar GDP per capita, just to have a good comparison. And of course, there's some quite key findings that we want to share with you. Leading the charge, of course, is India. India, of course, scores very high on the demand side because in recent competition, the last maybe 4 or 5 years has driven down prices per GP to a very affordable level. In fact, sometimes it's maybe bordering on unsustainable. But from the demand side perspective, for consumers, it's a very good deal because you get very good lots of data for a very low price. Bhutan seems to be playing an outsized role because I think although they are a small country, small market, they're number 3 in our ranking because they have recently achieved a lot in terms of boosting 4G penetration and adoption of 4G accounts. Vietnam also does very well because I think SME adoption is sky high. And more importantly, is actually in the Vietnamese mobile operators, they seem to be able to offer second highest mobile data speeds in Southeast Asia, just behind Singapore. And that's when we deep dive into the reason of this phenomenon. There's quite a clear indication of what causes this, and we'd like to share that with you. Next slide, please. Next slide talks about the supply side demand scores. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, okay, thank you. So this is, of course, scoring the countries into a supply side. Supply side are things like, for example, the competitive intensity, how many operators, sorry, one back. About the competitive intensity, how many operators are there? How intense is the competition fight? Talk about national regulatory best practices, investment policies, of course, policy spectrum, and country risk, which includes government effectiveness, corruption, political stability. So here, some quite insightful outcomes. India, as you remember, scored number 1 in the previous demand side score. Here, they're number 4, and really because in the past few years, market disruption and perhaps one can argue some of the policy making has not been so robust, has caused severe market disruptions. And in the last 4 or 5 years, I think about 8 operators have exited the market due to such changes, such huge seismic changes. And of course, we know from reports today that the policymakers are trying to remediate some of these issues, especially on the policy level. And that means that for India, it seems to be stabilizing in the future. Vietnam, I mentioned before, Vietnam scored very high, second highest in terms of data speeds in Southeast Asia, just after Singapore, really because the mobile operators have one of the highest amount of spectrum granted to them, and that includes spectrum for 4G and even 5G. So I think that is very insightful because it helps us to understand why certain countries are doing better in terms of some of the speed rankings, for example, which gets a lot of publicity. I won't delve into this anymore. Next slide. The next slide talks about a few things where we ask consultants to look for correlations, because you have supply side drivers and you have demand side drivers. Some of these parameters cause figuratively a larger turn. So if you have certain things which you want to engineer and policy outcome, so what do you do in terms of the supply side parameters to make that happen? So this, I'll share with you a couple of ones. They're not, I don't have time for everything. One of the key matrices that governments and policymakers talk today about is mobile broadband penetration, right? The more broadband you have across your adoption, across your markets, or across your citizens, means you have better outcomes. So what causes mobile broadband penetration to actually turn faster? And to our surprise, and this is quite a genuine surprise, taxation policy has a greater correlation, a strong correlation between how a country with better tax policies generate better mobile broadband penetration. And this is, when you deep dive into it, it seems to make sense because lower corporate and consumer taxes actually promotes consumption and enables the operators to reinvest earnings. And this is quite important because in South Asian countries, the effective tax rate upon consumers as a consumer tax, as well as a tax on businesses, is actually higher than an average. So taxation policy actually turns the wheel a bit faster, right? What is surprising to us is, say on the bottom right-hand side, enabling licensing framework. To us who are in the practice of policy making all these many years, for me, it's surprising because we always thought if a country has enabling licensing framework, right, openness, transparency, we thought, okay, that will actually promote certainty and hence down the road, promote broadband penetration. In the study, it's actually a weak correlation. I think, I'm not sure why that is, but it doesn't really turn the needles, push the needles too much in terms of tax policy. The other metric I want to point out is, of course, on higher affordability of 4G smartphones. Smartphones, of course, is very important. As we all know, intuitively, the cheaper the products go into the market to the consumers, the more affordable it becomes, and therefore the more take-up happens. That's quite intuitive, and we see that quite real in some countries. Although in some countries, of course, the import duties issue on smartphones, especially those coming from abroad, has also been one of the impediments for this thing to go on. Next slide, please. I just want to touch on another parameter, another correlation. It's about mobile data speed and mobile spectrum assignments. I think we see it very clearly in Vietnam. So Vietnam, you see on the left-hand chart, is off the charts because really they have assigned more spectrum to more on a per mobile operator basis. And as Asuko-san mentioned in her previous briefing, in the recent 18 months due to the pandemic, actually consumption on broadband has actually skyrocketed. And we see that across our networks. We see at least even in the more average markets, around 50% increase. In high performing countries, I think it's around 100%, so double the consumption on year-on-year basis. And really because some of our networks are congested in some locations, and really we cannot expand because the amount of spectrum available to us is not there. I wouldn't go into the next couple of slides. You can actually see it and read it on yourself. It's due to paucity of time. But I just want to leave with you the last slide, please. Next one, please. I just want to leave you some key takeaways. For example, I think in our research, I think for us the surprising thing was that taxation policies actually turns the wheel faster than the rest, more than, for example, regulatory best practices or licensing rules, right? Of course, that means that for us, as in the private sector, we want to actually talk to the policymakers to focus their attention and resources on maybe rationalizing taxation. There's some countries in South Asia, for example, have taxes which are counterintuitive. For example, tax on towers. So this is kind of weird because the more towers means the better coverage, right? So if you tax towers, it means you are effectively penalizing coverage. The other point about FDI policies, because a lot of policymakers need to know that they are in competition for FDI with their neighbors. And where a country risk is high, country risk here is defined by perhaps the political stability or corruption or rule of law. Where the risk is high, then we believe that there is a need for stronger protection and regulatory clarity for foreign investors to counter the risk. So where you cannot control, which is some of these facts are external, the policymakers need to then with those policies within the control, be able to provide better protection. There's also a misalignment between investment promotion agencies. A lot of countries have investment promotion agencies, but sometimes the objectives are running counter to, for example, the tax authorities or the Ministry of Finance. So this misalignment sends different signals, often competing signals to investors like us. I wouldn't go through this list because you can read it on your own. I think I just want to leave the point that some of these learnings is quite new to us and we're quite surprised, but we would love to work with you and the bank, ADB, and of course with other policymakers to address this issue systematically. So thank you very much for your time. Sorry, I took more time than allocated. Back to you, Cleo. Thank you so much.
Thank you, CK. Very surprising. Taxation and affordability of smartphones are more drivers on penetration. Okay, next, we'd like to go to Mr. Tom Verghese. He will give us the trends of digital connectivity investment. This is from Facebook's recent experience in submarine cables, fibers, and other network-related investments. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you so much, Cleo. I hope everyone can hear me loud and clear. Good morning to everyone in Manila and the wider region. Thank you so much for extending this invitation to Facebook to join this DigitalxADB event. I am part of Facebook's connectivity and access policy team, which means that I work on our products, programs, and partnerships to help more people get online to a faster internet. On a personal note, a few years ago, I used to work for Grameenphone in Bangladesh. And as Bapak Susanto mentioned, it was the first investment ADB did in the telecom sector. So I'm a strong supporter of ADB's engagement in ICT. I think the experience of the pandemic over the last 2 years has been vastly different on many levels. One, for those who've had good internet access, those who've been able to stay in touch with loved ones, to do their jobs online, to access health and education services, and a very different for those who've not had internet access. And today, I want to share briefly about some of the important work that's happening in expanding digital infrastructure and Facebook's role in that. Moving to the next slide, I think a starting point, which is important, is to really understand some of the challenges we're facing. For the last 5 years, Facebook has partnered with the Economist Intelligence Unit on the Inclusive Internet Index. And there's 3 main findings from this year's report. One is very intuitive, which is life has really moved online. The vast majority of the people who responded to the survey pointed to things like socialization, work, entertainment, education had shifted online since the pandemic began. And nearly 70% of people around the world believed that their increased internet usage in all aspects of life signified a new normal that will continue indefinitely into the future. Hence, our dependence on the internet is likely to remain long after the pandemic. The second trend we saw was what we call the availability paradox. Regions of the world without widespread access to quality internet have become the ones most dependent upon it. To take one example, people in low-income countries and lower middle-income countries relied on online education during the pandemic, much more than those in wealthier countries where schools reopened much faster. It's predicted that people will continue to use online channels for education even after the pandemic has subsided. Hence, the potential value of the internet is highest for those often underserved when it comes to availability of internet access. The third trend we've been seeing for several years actually is the usage gap. The majority of countries in the last 5 years have seen an improvement when it comes to internet inclusion overall, in part because of the increased availability and continued expansion of 4G and fixed networks. We used to have a coverage gap in APAC, primarily marked by insufficient network coverage. But that has evolved many places into a usage gap marked by people unable or unwilling to use the internet. The results from this year's Inclusive Internet Index really underscores the importance of taking a holistic approach to addressing the complex and urgent issues across government, industry, and civil society. So let me talk briefly about Facebook's role when it comes to connectivity on the next slide. So connectivity is an integral part of Facebook's mission to bring people closer together. And Facebook Connectivity is a program within the company really focused on how can we develop new technologies, business models, and partnerships to connect more people to the internet. We care about this because our business fundamentally depends on good connectivity. And all of our products are closely tied to network operators and the mobile ecosystem. And we want to actively partner with that ecosystem to help make it thrive with strong network performance and continuous innovation. On the next slide, you'll see that to make it happen, what Facebook has done is to build teams of tech and telecom experts and engineers around the world who dedicate their expertise to helping solve some of the biggest challenges in connectivity. And we try to work with the entire telecom ecosystem, from internet service providers to mobile network operators, satellite operators, equipment manufacturers, other tech companies like ourselves, policymakers, financial institutions, to develop and implement new technologies, the business models that are required, and the insights that can be used to improve global connectivity. And I'll give a couple of examples of what exactly it is that Facebook does and our different role in different connectivity initiatives. On the next slide, one of the big challenges in APAC is the demand for international capacity. As part of life moving online, there's a growing demand for more international capacity, particularly in Southeast Asia, which far outpaces the current supply. As digital markets across the region are getting more integrated through trade, data flows, and e-commerce, the demand is both for intra-regional connectivity and connecting Southeast Asia to other hubs. Facebook is increasingly investing in subsea cables in the region. And just this year, we've announced our participation in 3 cables connecting Singapore, Indonesia, Philippines with Japan, Taiwan, and North America. Our investments in subsea cables increase the supply of international bandwidth. It reduces the cost for local operators. And we're really trying to structure these agreements in a way where everyone benefits from developing scaled infrastructure and shared technology expertise. The second area that we're very focused on is backhaul infrastructure. And we know that backhaul infrastructure is a bottleneck in many countries, and building out fiber infrastructure represents a large portion of the costs that a telecoms operator has. It's difficult to provide users with high-speed connectivity at affordable prices when you lack fiber optic deployments. Especially for a successful introduction of 5G in APAC, it's critical that towers are connected with fiber optic cables. But in most countries, particularly in Southeast Asia, the tower fiberization rate is below 30%. So one of the areas where Facebook's try to help is to provide funding for the deployment of fiber optic cables. In 2019, we announced our first project in collaboration with the ISP in Indonesia to deploy 4,000 kilometers of metro fiber to connect more than 1,000 cell sites. This was our first and largest terrestrial fiber investment in APAC. And when completed, this will provide higher speed internet services to more than 14 million people. Just earlier this year, we announced a similar project in Pakistan, and we're really encouraged by some of the initial results we're getting. Finally, there's fixed wireless access. Dense cities with complicated infrastructure make it very difficult to run fiber to every street, to every home, and to every office. And this limits the bandwidth and access to reliable, high-quality internet, connecting homes and businesses. One of the challenges is that deploying fiber optic cables can very often be cost prohibitive. It can take time because of things like rights of way and trenching fiber. So what Facebook has done is to develop a technology called Teragraph. It's a gigabit wireless technology to provide fast and affordable alternative to deploying fiber. And by using the 60 gigahertz spectrum band, it provides speeds similar to fiber, supports use cases such as fixed wireless access, public Wi-Fi, and the underlying connectivity for a lot of smart city use cases. We've provided this technology for large-scale deployments, such as in Georgetown, Penang, in collaboration with local telecom operators. Let me end with a note on what we can do together on the next slide. Let's take the example of rural connectivity, one of the harder problems when it comes to internet access. Rural connectivity remains a challenge in a number of APAC countries. Meanwhile, many of these same countries have succeeded in expanding access to electricity in many of the same areas. In the bottom right corner, you see countries with the highest discrepancy between rural electricity access and household internet connectivity. The gains made in rural electrification can also benefit internet access in several ways. For instance, you can align rural electrification plans with internet infrastructure deployment. You can introduce DIG-1 policies to lower the cost of deployment of both the electricity grid and fiber optic cables. And you can enable shared infrastructure policies that allow multiple operators to share the same infrastructure rather than having multiple deployments in the same area. At Facebook, we work under the assumption that there's really no silver bullet challenge or silver bullet solution to solving the challenges around connectivity. And materializing opportunities like this really requires broad partnerships. And with that, I'll pause, but happy to discuss more details around some of these initiatives. Thank you, Cleo.
Thank you, Tom. That's really great. You know, on the shared infrastructure policies, I think this is really going into that connectivity for the digital connectivity is now a social service obligation of each government. So from the government perspective, Ms. Balor, she will present on Mongolia's experience and efforts in expanding the coverage and access to high quality, high speed broadband, lessons learned, remaining challenges, and future strategies. So Ms. Balor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cleo, and thanks for having me. I'm very happy to share our experience. So before I jump into the topic, I would like to give you some statistics about Mongolia. Next slide, please. So, I mean, today's talk that I will be focusing on will be on experience and efforts of Mongolia, remaining challenges and future strategies that the government will be implementing in the future. So for those who have been to Mongolia would know that Mongolia is very sparsely populated. We believe that we are one of the last countries to have nomadic lifestyle as a livelihood. Today, Mongolia's population is 3.3 million people. In such big land, as you can see, it's 1.5 million square kilometers. Per GDP per capita is $4,000. As you know, Mongolia geographically is very interesting because we're sandwiched between two giant countries, Russia and China. As you can see from the demographic, Mongolia is a relatively young country, a very young nation in terms of the age structure. One third of the population lives in the countryside as a herder communities in the provinces, and the rest, actually almost half of the country, half of the population lives in the cities, in 2-3 big cities, especially Ulaanbaatar, which is the capital city, which is also the coldest capital city in the world. In terms of internet users, of course, socially is one of the biggest platforms that people use on the internet. On the Facebook, we have 2.2 million users, 400,000 users for Instagram, and 44,000 users for Twitter. Next slide, please. So actually, a few weeks ago, we celebrated our 100th anniversary of modern ICT sector. But in 1990, we transitioned to democracy from socialist system. So the modern history starts from 1990s. In 1992, we started connecting fiber optics throughout the nation. And as of today, out of 330 SOMs, SOM is small towns or villages, almost 323 is connected to fiber optic. And this year, in 2021, the government of Mongolia announced a goal to become a digital nation as part of the Vision 2050 long-term policy document of Mongolia. Next slide. So we have very interesting statistics. We have more smartphones than the number of the population. We have 3 million 3G users, 2.6 million 4G users. And as you can see, the number of contracted internet users from the slide, and most of the internets are actively used by the households, business entities, and public institutions. So from this map, you can see that out of 330 villages, we have fiber optics in the 325 SOMs or villages, which means that we have very good connectivity throughout the nation. However, we had a new challenge during the pandemic. For those who have been to Mongolia's countryside would know that the herder communities live far from each other because they have this herds that should not join together, otherwise it would be a mess. So a lot of herder communities live far from each other. But we have this fiber optics in the village, in the towns that has the infrastructure. So during the pandemic, the biggest challenge we had was that when the kids as children in the countryside, in herder communities, had to stay home and were not allowed to go to school, we had challenge for delivering internet to them and accessibility to them, despite wherever they are in the wild land of Mongolia. So that was a big challenge. When the pandemic started, we planned this and we connected a lot of schools, hospitals, specific locations within the village, within the zone. And certain areas within the provinces that has more children to fiber optics. So it was a sudden but new project that the government had to invest in, and it was a big pressure for the state budget, government budget as well. But again, this pandemic made us to look back and think about inclusion and accessibility and who is the government, the people that the government has to serve are in the remote areas. People in the city they do have good internet connections, they have accessibility, they have the equipment or computers or iPads, all the smart equipment. But on the other hand, people in the countryside who live as a herder community, they don't have smartphones that much, or they don't have computers, etc., etc. So it has been a big challenge, and it made us realize that the inclusion is something that we have to pay attention to and deliver government services, deliver internet accessibilities to those who are already left out from the digital development. So then the priority for the government of Mongolia changed to inclusion and serve those who are in need, who are already digitally illiterate. So the government initiated a program to increase the number of people who are digitally literate. There are a lot of online trainings. We are using radios, traditional media tools, televisions, learning materials to teach people how to use internet when they have accessibilities. So on the bright side, as we all are discussing here, the pandemic made us realize the importance of inclusion and look back and see the infrastructure we have done throughout the years and reevaluate. So I personally see this as a bright side of the pandemic. And also we kind of introduced new services, new online services to hospitals, which are very, very traditional, kind of left out from digital development places. So that was the bright side of the pandemic. And next year and the few years that are coming, Mongolian government will be investing to internet accessibilities, especially focusing on people who are living in the remote areas, vulnerable communities, or outskirts of the city or poor areas. So these are specific targets that the government is focusing on in the next few years, and the Ministry of Finance is budgeting, supporting the budget for these infrastructures. Next, please. So as some of you might know, the government of Mongolia introduced e-Mongolia platform last year on the 1st of October 2020. By the time we launched in Mongolia, we had 181 services that were available. But throughout the pandemic, we were working hard to digitalize the government services. And we had series of 7 lockdowns during this pandemic until now. And during this pandemic, e-Mongolia introduced government services and delivery systems. So a lot of people were able to register a company, order their ID cards, order their driver's license. They took a lot of government services online. So actually the number of the users we have introduced increased by 60%, and now we have about 1.9 million users out of 2.2 adults of Mongolia. So we have reached 80% of the customer. And during the pandemic, e-Mongolia platform did launch some digital literacy programs on the social media as well as the television, so people would know and learn how to use e-Mongolia. So e-Mongolia not only gives provides the government service, but also helps people to understand technology and learn about technology. So so far we have delivered 3.9 million services online. This year, actually 2 weeks ago, on the 1st of October, after 1 year, we launched the Mongolia version 2.0, which is based on artificial intelligence, where we introduced digital ID. So all the ID cards, passports, driver's license, social securities became online document on your phone. So you don't have to bring all these documents with you while you can monitor your data. So if the government staff or anyone who's accessing to your information will be notified, so you can check who saw your data, and you can file a complaint if you think that's not correct or right thing. So far, within a year, we have seen so much impact from eMongolia. So far, according to a research organization, we have saved 46 billion tugriks, which is roughly 22 million US dollars, from corruption, red tape, bureaucracy, for paper, all the costs that were saved were up to that amount. And as a result, we have seen concrete impact on red tape, bureaucracy, corruption, reducing corruption, and also ensuring government services are inclusive and accessible to everybody. So this has been actually very good timing that we launched it, and during the pandemic, people were able to get government services and also be in touch with government. So we now introduced 1111. It's a phone number where people call to complain about certain government organizations or issues. So we integrated this complaint system with eMongolia so people can access and file a complaint or leave a suggestions to the government. And also people can give any bribery or corruption information on the eMongolia platform as well. Early in the pandemic, we also introduced some statistics of the pandemic on eMongolia so people can check how many cases were there, how many deaths were there per day. So every day you get a notification at noon, and then and that way we were informing people as well as encouraging people to get vaccinated. Next, please. So remaining challenges, as I mentioned, still internet accessibility remains very different in the rural areas. We have to improve the connectivity, especially in the very, very, very remote areas of Mongolia. And when we talk to operators, telecom operators, most of the companies are not interested to connect to the remote areas because they believe that it's, well, not believe, but it is true that the return of investment is very low. So it has to be done by the government budget. And very low average revenue per unit. That's a challenge for, again, telecom operators for investing in small markets. So we also need to develop geo-orbit-based internet technology to increase the coverage and accessibility of internet connection to the areas that we are not reaching. Depending on the income level, there is still problem of not being able to buy the internet. So the internet price of Mongolia, the average price is relatively low. It's lower than the world average price, but still we have poverty issues. Therefore, still these internet prices seem to be expensive to the certain communities. But for eMongolia and not other learning platforms that are provided by the government, operators worked with us, and it has been data free for a year, for over a year during the pandemic and lockdown, so people can learn and access to the government services. Next slide, please. So we have sustainable development policies for Mongolia 2030, as well as we have Vision 2050 long-term policy document that the Parliament approved. And for the near future, we will be implementing these objectives. The objective 7 it reflects that infrastructure section to connect 70% of the population to high-speed internet, follow the same prices and tariffs regardless of location, increase the flow of information through a high-speed data network connecting Asia and Europe by 10 times. Phase 2, which is starting from this year, 90% of the population will be connected to speed internet. 70% of the rural population will use broadband internet services, and at least 50% of the government will be digitalized. So I am very happy to say that we have achieved most of these concepts and goals. Now, more than 50% of the government services are digitalized. We have for 540 services digitalized on e-Mongolia platform, which will become 600 by the end of this year. And also we are giving out all the licenses, special licenses on the e-Mongolia platform as well. Phase 3 from 2026 to connect 95% of the population to a high-speed internet, transfer at least 85 of government services, and launch a national satellite. So as you can see, some of the goals we are ahead of time. We have already reached. One of the issues that the Mongolian government, as well as people of Mongolia, have been discussing and dreaming is national satellite, which we are currently working on. So yes, next slide. So from this year, the government has proposed the goal to become a digital nation. So Digital Nation Initiative has 5 strategic goals. The first is network connection in rural areas will be completed. But while we do that, there are certain priorities like tourist zones, etc., etc. Internet networking along Class A international roads will be established. 5G network will be introduced to Ulaanbaatar in 2022. And also one of the biggest goals, as I mentioned earlier, is national satellite ground station will be established and preparation will commence. Next, please. So this is the brief information about how we are dealing with infrastructure accessibility during the pandemic and what the government is planning. The main lessons we learned is to look back to our infrastructure and really try to make it as inclusive as possible so we can serve our citizens in need who are in remote areas. So now, thanks to good infrastructure and accessibilities, citizens, herders who are herding their ships on the horse can get into e-Mongolia and order their passport or ID cards or anything they want from the government and have it delivered to their homes, their yurts in the countryside. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ulrich. This is really inspiring. And well, 80% of the adult population, being registered for e-government, and this is such an incredible achievement. And your ambition to get to every yurt is really a testament to how government is meeting the needs of the people. Okay, so well, how can we meet the needs of the people a bit better, cheaper? Let's go to Dr. Emura. He'll give us the technology trends in communication networks and current market dynamics in APAC, as well as insight into the current and future digital connectivity in Asia. Dr. Emura.
Thank you, Kureo. I'm honored to join this session, and thank you for the invitation. I'm NEC Fellow, but I'm also serving as a member of the high-level advisory group on digital technology for ADB. NEC is a company to provide values and solutions to the society based on our advanced technology. So today, I'm providing our vision for the technology advancement in communication networks, and I would also like to discuss the importance of digital connectivity to improve the society in developing countries in Asia. So NEC sets our purpose as orchestrating a brighter world to provide value to the society. We set 7 themes for value creation, from sustainable Earth to quality of life. Communication is one of the essential areas for delivering seamless social services to everyone. Providing connectivity for all is quite critical. We found our 7 themes are highly compatible with ADB's 7 priorities. We are expecting to contribute and support for achieving various ADB's agenda. So I would like to introduce some use cases that indicate the connectivity with social services could drastically change the society. We show the case in India on the left-hand side, the India Aadhaar program. They have introduced national identification program using NEC's biometric authentication, such as fingerprint, face, and iris recognition. With this program, India already covers more than 1.2 billion people out of 1.3 billion their nationals. With a safe and secure platform, they can provide social services such as supply food, job matching, financial services equally and efficiently to every registered citizen. It would enhance the level of living for citizens in India. We provide similar solutions in various developing countries, including Africa. As these use cases indicate, providing social service with enriched connectivity would contribute to change and improve society. This is a track record of NEC's biometric solution. We are contributing globally to change and improve the society with these solutions. So about the digital connectivity, today's main topics, we are providing solutions from space to deep sea. About the basic backbone service in communication system, we are providing not only submarine cable, but also microwave radio system named PASOLINK. The PASOLINK is very easy for install, especially for backhaul communication. We also provide submarine cable, not only for major backbone, but to provide the connectivity to remote islands. We are providing last mile access with mobile network, but for the area that is not covered by current mobile network services, the satellite communication would play an important role. Historically, NEC has been contributing a lot for the region. We started business in Asia in 1960s, and today we have more than 7,000 employment in Southeast, Southwest, and Central Asia. Not only providing telecom equipment and services, we are contributing to the capacity building in the region. Now, I would like to introduce technical trend in communication, especially in mobile networks. With the advance in technology, we are introducing 5G, 5th generation network, starting in developed countries. To realize easy installation and avoiding a kind of vendor lock-in, open radio access is going to introduce, which is one of the new trends in communication network. By introducing 5G network with high bandwidth, low latency, and large number of connectivity, and with their characteristics of agile and easy installation, safe and secure operation, and open and shared usage of the system, we are able to resolve a variety of social issues and create new social services as listed here. I am understanding that one of the challenges in developing countries is the agile network deployment for coverage expansion. We could provide various technologies for easy and agile installation. So our first example is a microwave system, as I already explained. The second one is off-grid base station. Even without network power supply, we can provide a communication network in a rural area. Third one, and the tower is a kind of technology for sharing the network infrastructure. As Tom pointed out, the sharing the network infrastructure is quite critical, especially in developing countries. Also, in addition, it is important to provide solutions for reliable and resilient operation. So we have many offerings to those improvement of the operation. To conclude, we are willing to collaborate with ADB to lift the region's network coverage targeted to 100% and enhance the communication boundaries by using relevant technologies. Capacity building is essential in region, and we already have many records. By providing social services with digital connectivity, we are able to improve the quality of life of the region by increasing the GDP and enlarging the employment. Simultaneously, we are able to reduce poverty and CO2 emission in the region. We firmly believe enhancing the connectivity in the region is one of the most critical challenges in achieving ADB's 7 priorities. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Imra. That's very educational. This has been a great panel, but it's only left us with 3 minutes for question and answers. So I'd like to go to the question that we have from an anonymous attendee for Mongolia. Let me read this. Let's see. Interested to learn more about developments in Mongolia's enabling environment, especially in the approach you have taken to privacy and individual ownership of personal information. You had mentioned a notification being sent on access to private information would be useful for other countries rolling out similar e-government frameworks. So over to you, Ms. Bloor.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. So the government of Mongolia has submitted the law on personal privacy issues on internet. So as much as the government and the private sector digitalize their services, one of the important issues is privacy and cybersecurity. So we are submitting several laws on privacy and cybersecurity. And before doing that, we have introduced a notification system on eMongolia. So eMongolia has integrated 540 services from almost 60 government agencies and ministries. And for example, when your tax officer is working on your tax, he has to or she has to check your data. And when she checks your data, you will get notified. So you will see, okay, it's this like Miss or Mr. from this organization checking your data to fill up your tax report, for example. So if you think that's fine, then you will be fine. But if you don't think that's fine, you will file a complaint. So the government or certain organizations will check why she accessed into your data. So the people who are able to access to your data are only government certified employees who are entitled to do so. That's why they have access to the system. But again, we have to be sure. So in the democracy, we have to give the people the right to own their data, monitor their data, and check if it's correct. So we have developed the system and the legal environment for that specific purpose.
Thank you, Laura. I think that was a great answer. So if I can be very selfish, I'd like to ask the last question. ADB is really committed to play a bigger role in helping the region achieving the universal digital access. What recommendation do you have for ADB in this endeavor? Can I ask CK first?
Thanks, Cleo. I think the bank has a tremendous opportunity to play a leading role in at least advocating best practices in rulemaking, right? As I mentioned in our study, we actually found that taxation policy, for example, is a great lever turner. So, I mean, in the private sector can do all is shouting and screaming, right? But influential people like the bank and ADB, like yourself, when you speak, I think the idea is to reduce the external risk, both from investment, from private sector investment, as well as funding from the bank. We have a common interest in making sure the risks are lowered, and this means better policy making, better, more rational rule making. And that would be, I think we will love to partner with ADB to just carry these messages everywhere we go. Yeah, thank you. Hope that answers the question.
Thank you, great answer. Tom, can I go to you next from the private sector investor point of view?
Sure. I think the greatest lesson from the pandemic was that there's no quick fix to getting people online when suddenly the dependency on the internet grows rapidly. I think there's two areas where a lot of work needs to be done, where I would also encourage ADB to focus. I think one is the traditional way we've connected people through traditional telecoms infrastructure has kind of come to an end. And we see that because fewer people are actually coming online every year. And this has been the case for the last 5-6 years. I think where the need is today is how can we develop new technologies, new business models, and new partnerships? I think Dr. Amura mentioned an excellent example with Open RAN. And Open RAN is a very fast growing technology where we're trying to develop 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G solutions based on general purpose vendor neutral hardware. Essentially is rather than going to one vendor to build your entire telecoms network, you're making it flexible. So you can build your network in modules, which allows for interoperability, lower cost, more efficient networks. And I think it's in these technologies that really funding needs and support is required. The other aspect is technical assistance to develop policy frameworks. There's a great compounding effect of having done the right things over time. And I think that was very clear among countries that were able to transition effectively to providing health education services online during the pandemic. So doing the basics right, like lower barriers to entry, healthy competition, having a national broadband plan, infra sharing, reasonable spectrum prices, and training in digital literacy, where Mongolia gives some great learnings. I think these are really two critical paths where ADB can play a supportive role.
Thank you. That's really great. Ms. Bowler from Mongolia, what can we do for you? You've seemed to have done everything right already.
No, we have a long way to go, but I always appreciate ADB for taking part of Mongolia's development, especially during the pandemic. ADB has helped us enormously, and we even as a citizen and also representing the government, we are very grateful for that. So one of the biggest challenges, despite the infrastructure that we face, is digital literacy. So as much as we digitalize the services, it's a lifelong learning. Digital literacy is a lifelong learning, and in every society you have different age groups, different communities who need different type of tools to learn digital literacy. So I think many, not only in Mongolia, but many developing countries, it's very important to pay attention to digital literacy, especially for those who are older or for those communities who do not have regular access or computers. And in Mongolia's case, especially children in the countryside. So actually, I initiated this girls coding program, which brought 30 girls from the countryside, from vulnerable communities, to the city, and we taught them how to code. So now, well, it's like they're high school girls, but half of them got an offer from big commercial banks here, because within 3 months they achieved a lot. They learned how to code instantly, and that's one of the cases how we can help them with this, and so they can make it more great, and they can bring that know-how and education to their communities and teach their peers and classmates and other people in their community. So yeah, I would say digital literacy. Thank you.
Thank you. Digital literacy. Dr. Emura, can I get some more advice from you? Although you are already on our advisory panel.
Yeah, one of the things is, some of our colleagues pointed out, providing a real solution, we need to make a good ecosystem. But in some cases, it is very difficult for us to make those ecosystems, especially in a local area. So we don't know who is the right person. So if ADB can help to create an ecosystem, it's quite appreciated. And the other thing is that we should discuss not only connectivity, but the connectivity plus services, as I explained some use cases. And maybe with that, there are lots of things to transform the system itself. So ADB may give a guide what the benefit of not only making a high connectivity, but also the services. That's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Last but not least, Ms. Okuda, can we see a way of working together to help Asia on this?
Thank you. Absolutely. I can already foresee many collaboration entry points. And perhaps I can, in addition to all the good points already shared by the speakers, I would like to highlight perhaps a few more. One is that I think ADB is in a very strategic position to leverage and catalyze the national resources which are already existing. And especially now, it's very important perhaps for all of us to think about targeted digital interventions and investments to recover quickly and quicker from COVID and to accelerate SDGs. The achievement of SDGs. And finally, as Emra-san and the CK were, and also Tom mentioned, perhaps the ecosystem and policy change and how we can collectively become a policy advocate would be perhaps a key word, because there are national resources that country can utilize to really move faster in digital transformation. And I think there are some keys and key areas that we can all work together. And if I can also promote some of our interventions and initiatives, for instance, smart islands and school connectivity that ITU is working on, I believe will fall into some of these interventions, and will be so happy to continue the discussion and work with ADB and all the speakers who participated today. And I look forward to that next opportunity very soon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm told I have 1 minute, so I won't try to wrap up with all the good advice that's given and the great panel discussion, the information that's been given. I think this is the beginning, and I hope that we can all work together further and to make accessibility to digital universal in Asia as soon as possible. Thank you very much, everyone. Great seeing you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you, Cleo, and the panelists. And I hope the virtual audience was as inspired and challenged by this informative session. We do apologize for going over time, but before you leave, I would like to give a quick overview of what's going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow, we launch into discussion on geospatial information that forms a very important pillar of the soft digital infrastructure and digital government. We'll have a panel discussion on national spatial data infrastructure, and in the afternoon, move on to a showcase of various geospatial information solutions that helped ADB projects and beyond. Before we wrap up, we'd also like everyone to take 1 minute to take the poll and tell us what you thought of today's session. And once you leave today's event, you'll also receive an email from us to fill a very short survey to provide us with feedback and your interest in continuing the dialogue with us. Okay. And this feedback will, of course, help us improve our curation of future events. So we thank you in advance for your time. So that wraps up today's event, but we have many more exciting talks and a fantastic lineup of speakers in store for the rest of October. So thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back at DigitalxADB.